The Prince and the Pauper. Long ago, in a kingdom, there was a son born to a king and queen. He was named Edward. On the same day, a son was born to a very poor family. He was named Tom. Prince Edward was treated very well, with lots of food and clothes. But for Tom, it was the opposite. His father made him beg for food on the streets. One day, Tom saw a huge palace. He wanted to go in. But the guard stopped him because he was wearing dirty, ragged clothes. "You cannot enter this palace. Go away, you little rat." Prince Edward saw this and said,
"Why is there screaming?"
"Your Highness, this pauper boy is trying to enter the palace."
"Even though he's a pauper, he's still one of my people."
Prince Edward brought Tom into the palace and gave him some food. He suggested Tom to switch clothes because he wanted to go out. Tom couldn't do anything but agree. Surprisingly, they looked like twins. Prince Edward headed outside of the palace. Tom's father, who thought Prince Edward was Tom, dragged him back to their house. He beat him every day and made him beg for money. Meanwhile, Tom tried to convince the servants that he wasn't Prince Edward. However, no one believed him and thought he was ill. One day, Prince Edward bumped into Knight Hendon. Believing his story, Knight Hendon decided to help him go back to the palace. On that day, the king had died, and Tom was about to be crowned as the new king. When he was receiving the crown, Knight Hendon bursted in with Prince Edward.
"Wait! I am the real Prince Edward, not him."
Everyone didn't believe in him. So Tom said,
"He is right. He is the real prince."
Prince Edward took out the royal seal to prove that he was the prince. Everyone believed them, and Prince Edward was crowned as the king. Touched by Tom's honesty, he let him become his chief advisor and awarded Knight Hendon. They ruled the country together and lived happily ever after.
Fairy tale.
The Frog Prince. Once upon a time, there lived a beautiful princess. On the princess's birthday, she received a golden ball from her father. She liked the ball so much that she always played with it. One day, she dropped it into a well by accident. She was so sad that she burst out crying. Suddenly, a frog showed up out of nowhere and said,
"Don't cry, princess. I'll get it out for you. In return, you'll have to be friends with me." eat and sleep together with me.
The princess agreed because she wanted to get the golden ball back as soon as possible. So, the frog got the golden ball from the bottom of the deep well. The princess was delighted and ran back to the palace with the ball. The next day, the frog came to the palace and said,
Princess, let me eat with you. You promised.
The princess turned away, but her father scolded her. If you've made a promise, you must keep it. Unwillingly, the princess ate and played with the frog. At night, the frog jumped into the princess's bed.
Please, kiss me goodnight.
The princess hated it, but she kissed the frog's cold, damp cheeks.
I can't stand it any longer.
She threw the frog off the bed. At that moment, a handsome prince appeared out of nowhere. I am the prince of the neighboring country. I became a frog by an evil witch's spell. Thanks to you, the spell has been broken. Will you marry me? The princess felt sorry for what she had done, but nodded shyly. They got married and lived happily ever after.
Fairy tale.
The Happy Prince. In a faraway village, there stood a statue of a young prince. It was made of gold and all kinds of jewelry. People called it Happy Prince because of its beauty and splendor. In winter, a bird seeking shelter landed on the Happy Prince. When it saw the prince crying, it was surprised.
Happy Prince, why are you crying? I am so sad because I can see many poor people from up here. Will you help me help them?
The prince asked the bird to take his ruby to a poor woman. She was taking care of her baby, but there was nothing for them to eat. The bird removed the ruby from the prince's sword and gave it to the woman. The next morning, the prince said to the bird,
There's a poor writer living without food. Will you help me again?
The bird removed the emerald from the prince's eye and gave it to the poor writer. The next day, the prince asked the bird for help once again.
There's a poor girl who dropped all the eggs she had to sell. Will you help me for the last time?
The bird removed the emerald from the prince's other eye and gave it to the poor girl. Though very tired and cold, the bird stayed with the prince. It removed the gold off of the prince's body and continued to help the poor people. The appearance of the prince grew uglier. In time, the bird died, and the ugly statue was thrown into a fire. But prince's beautiful mind never turned to ashes. Truly, he was a happy prince.
The Wild Swans. Long time ago, in a kingdom lived a beautiful princess named Elisa and 11 handsome princes. They were happy until the king got married to a stepmother. She was actually an evil witch. She hated Elisa and the princes. With her magic spell, the princes turned into wild swans. Elisa was also kicked out. Elisa saw 11 wild swans flying in the sky. When the sun started to set, they turned back into the princes. The next morning, they were swans again. They made a large net and carried Elisa to the forest. When she was asleep, dreaming, a goddess appeared and said,
If you want to break the magic spell, make 11 sets of clothes out of nettles. Then, dress the swans one by one. But if you say a word before you finish, your brothers will die.
Elisa started to make the clothes for her brothers. Though the nettles hurt her fingers to bleed, she never took a rest. One day, a neighboring king saw Elisa in the forest and fell in love. He took her to his palace. Even in the palace, Elisa was busy weaving her brother's clothes while not saying a word. The archbishop of the country suspected Elisa as a witch, but the king did not listen. One night, when the nettles ran out, Elisa went to the cemetery to pick them up. The archbishop of the country saw it all and became sure that she was a witch. The king couldn't help but agree to put her to death. Elisa couldn't say any words and only concentrated on her work. On the morning of the execution day, her work came near to close. At the last moment, 11 swans appeared from the other side. Finally, Elisa finished 11 sets of nettle clothes. As soon as she threw them to the swans turned into human princes. The king and Elisa got married, and with them, the 11 princes lived happily ever after.
Fairy tale.
The Little Prince. Far away in space, there lived the little prince on a small asteroid called B612. He took good care of his asteroid by picking out baobab tree roots and cleaning his 3 volcanoes. To the little prince, there was a beautiful red rose that he loved. They were always together. But Rose started demanding the little prince for attention. Rose said,
Little prince, why aren't you taking care of me when I'm this beautiful? But I have other things to look after.
One day, the little prince, who was tired of this, decided to leave. He watered Rose and covered her with a glass case. Rose acted like she wasn't sad and waved goodbye as he left. On the first planet lived a greedy king. The king tried to make the little prince his servant, so the little prince left. On the second planet lived a flatterer. He kept on asking little prince to clap for him, which little prince did, but soon got tired. On the third planet, there was a drunkard who kept on drinking and drinking. He told little prince that he was drinking to forget the shame of drinking. On the fourth planet, he met a greedy businessman. On the fifth planet, there was a man who lighted street lamps. On the next planet he landed on, there was a geographer who told him to go to Earth. So the little prince went to Earth. The first thing he saw on Earth was a yellow snake. The snake told him that he was in a desert. After a while, the little prince went to a flower garden full of roses. He became sad because he realized that the rose on his planet wasn't the only rose. A fox appeared in front of the sad little prince.
If you tame me, then we shall need each other. If you come at 4 o'clock, I will be happy from 3 o'clock.
Then the little prince thought about the rose on his planet and realized that it was special to him. The fox also said,
The essential things in life are not seen with the eyes, but with the heart.
After the fox, the little prince met a pilot who was fixing his plane in the desert. He asked the pilot to draw him a sheep. The annoyed pilot drew a picture from his childhood. Seeing the drawing, the little prince said,
This is a boa that swallowed an elephant. I want a picture of a sheep.
The pilot was delighted that the little prince understood his drawing at once. So this time he drew a real sheep. Although he drew pictures of the sheep again and again, the little prince wasn't satisfied. Finally, the pilot drew a box, saying, "The sheep is in this box." The little prince was very fulfilled. After this, they started their way to search for a well.
What makes the desert beautiful is that somewhere it hides a well.
At last they found the well. And now the little prince had to go back to his planet.
Look up to the stars whenever you miss me.
As soon as he said this, a snake appeared and bit his ankle. Then he became fainter and fainter until he disappeared.